Most people will spend the majority of their lives working for money and never understand why money never seems to work for them. They will wake up at the same hour, drive the same route, sit in the same chair, collect the same paycheck, and go to bed wondering why their bank account looks nearly identical to what it looked like 5 years ago. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern, and patterns, unlike luck, can be studied, understood, and broken. There is a man who has spent over 7 decades observing this pattern, not from a position of pity, but from a position of deep, almost quiet fascination. Warren Buffett, the most studied investor in modern history, did not build one of the greatest fortunes ever accumulated by working harder than everyone else. He did not do it by chasing trends, by timing markets, or by betting everything on a single moment of brilliance. He did it by understanding something most people refuse to accept, that the rules of wealth are not secret. They are simply ignored. What you are about to hear is not financial advice. It is something far more valuable. It is a lens, a way of seeing money, time, and human behavior that most people will never develop. And if you stay with this until the very end, something will shift. Not in your bank account yet, in your thinking. And that is always where real change begins. Let us start with an uncomfortable truth about why most people stay poor not in spirit, but in financial reality. It is not because they lack ambition. Walk into any city in the world and you will find millions of deeply ambitious people who are broke. It is not because they lack intelligence. The world is full of extraordinarily intelligent people living paycheck to paycheck, and it is certainly not because they do not work hard. Some of the hardest working people on this planet have almost nothing to show for it financially. The real reason most people remain financially stuck is far more uncomfortable than any of those explanations. It comes down to this. They make emotional decisions about money in a world that rewards rational ones. Think about what happens when markets drop. When the news becomes frightening, when a neighbor buys a new car, when a colleague gets a promotion. Most people respond to money events the same way they respond to personal threats. They panic, they react, they compensate, they try to keep up. And the moment emotion takes the wheel in financial decisions, the outcome is almost always the same. They sell when they should hold. They buy when they should wait. They spend when they should save. And they explain all of it to themselves with stories that feel completely rational in the moment. There is also the trap that almost no one talks about openly, the employee trap. Not the fact of being employed, but the mindset that comes with it. The belief that income equals wealth, that a higher salary means financial progress, that working harder automatically translates into financial security. It does not. And this is perhaps the most painful realization for people who have dedicated years of their lives to climbing a ladder that may be leaning against the wrong wall. When your income rises, something fascinating and destructive tends to happen almost simultaneously. Your lifestyle rises with it. The apartment becomes a house, the house becomes a bigger house, the modest car becomes the premium car, the occasional dinner out becomes the expectation. This is called lifestyle inflation, and it is one of the most powerful wealth destroyers that exists, not because it is dramatic, but because it is invisible. You earn more. You feel more successful, you look more successful, and you are no closer to financial freedom than you were before. In many cases, you are further from it because now your entire financial structure requires that high income just to sustain itself. Stop the income and everything collapses. Buffett understood this intuitively. He lived in the same house at Omaha, Nebraska that he purchased in 1958. He drove modest cars long after he could have afforded fleets of the finest automobiles in the world. This was not performance. This was not humility for the cameras. This was the behavior of someone who understood that every dollar consumed is a dollar that cannot compound. And compounding, as we will soon discuss, is the entire game. The last trap worth naming before we move deeper is short-term thinking. The human brain is not naturally wired for long-term financial strategy. It is wired for immediacy. It wants results now. It wants to see progress now. It wants gratification now. And the financial world, in its wisdom, has built an entire industry around satisfying that impulse. Trading apps, cryptocurrency speculation, get-rich schemes, dressed in the language of opportunity, all of it is engineered to feel like velocity while actually keeping you in place. So what is the principle at the core of Buffett's philosophy? What is the thing that actually builds wealth, not over a lucky quarter, but over a lifetime? It is the understanding that wealth is not an event. It is a process. Buffett's entire approach to investing is built on what he calls intrinsic value. The idea that every business, every asset, every investment has a true worth that may or may not be reflected in its current market price. The market, in his view, is a voting machine in the short term and a weighing machine in the long term. In the short term, prices are driven by sentiment, fear, greed, momentum, and narrative. In the long term, prices are driven by reality, by whether the underlying business actually produces value. This distinction is not just about stocks, it is a philosophy that applies to every financial decision a person makes. Most people make financial decisions based on what something costs right now and what it might return right now. Buffett made financial decisions based on what something is genuinely worth and what it might return over a decade or more. This is not a small difference in strategy. It is an entirely different operating system for how you engage with money. He speaks often about the concept of the circle of competence, the idea that you should only operate within the areas you truly understand, not the areas that are exciting, not the areas that are trending, not the areas where everyone seems to be making money right now, but the areas you genuinely and deeply understand, because understanding is what separates informed patience from reckless hope. When you invest in something you do not understand, you are not investing. You are gambling with extra steps in a better story. The first lesson that flows directly from this philosophy is deceptively simple: buy quality and hold it. Buffett has described his ideal holding period for a great business as forever. This is not an exaggeration meant to sound poetic. It is a mathematical reality. When a great business compounds its earnings at a consistent rate over long periods of time, the returns become almost incomprehensible to someone thinking in months rather than decades. Consider what happens to money left untouched in a consistently growing investment over 20 or 30 years. The first decade often feels slow, progress appears minimal, the temptation to move, to adjust, to chase something more exciting becomes overwhelming. Most people give in to that temptation. They sell before the compounding truly begins to accelerate. But the person who understands what Buffett understands stays still. They remain patient not because they are passive, but because they are disciplined. They know that wealth is accumulated in the holding, not the trading. This applies beyond the stock market. It applies to the business you build, to the skills you develop, to the relationships you invest in. Quality held consistently over time almost always outperforms brilliance exercised impatiently. The second lesson is about the price of fear. In 2008, when global financial markets collapsed and panic spread through every conversation, every newsroom, and every household, most people did one of two things. They either froze and did nothing while hoping things would return to normal, or they sold everything at the worst possible prices just to stop the psychological pain of watching numbers fall. Buffett did something different. He bought aggressively, publicly. And the reasoning was clear in everything he communicated during that period. When everyone is afraid, prices fall below the actual value of the underlying asset. And if the asset is genuinely valuable, fear is not a reason to sell, it is a reason to buy more. He has often expressed that it is wise to be cautious when others are aggressive and aggressive when others are cautious. This principle sounds simple. It is extraordinarily difficult to execute in real time when your emotions are telling you that the world is ending and every signal around you confirms that fear. This is why emotional discipline is not a soft skill in the context of wealth building. It is the core skill. Without it, every other piece of knowledge becomes useless. You can understand compounding perfectly and still destroy your portfolio by panic selling at the bottom of every downturn. The price of fear, paid over a lifetime of reactive financial decisions, is enormous. It may be the single greatest hidden tax on wealth that exists. The third lesson is about the true cost of a bad habit disguised as a small decision. Buffett has a concept often referred to as the opportunity cost of spending. Every dollar you spend is not just a dollar gone. It is all the future value that dollar could have created if it had been invested and allowed to grow. This is not a reason to live in deprivation. It is a reason to become deeply intentional about where money goes. There is a meaningful difference between spending on things that maintain or improve your ability to generate and grow wealth and spending on things that simply feel good in the moment and then disappear. Both have a place in a human life, but only one of them builds a financial future. The discipline Buffett exercised for decades was not about being cheap. It was about being conscious, about understanding that every financial choice is also a choice about your future freedom. And freedom, financial freedom, the kind that allows you to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, is not built in dramatic moments of wealth creation. It is built in the quiet accumulation of thousands of small, intentional decisions made consistently over years. The fourth lesson concerns the nature of risk, which is widely misunderstood. Most people believe that playing it safe means low risk. That, at keeping money in familiar, comfortable places means protection. But there is a form of risk that is completely invisible to this way of thinking, the risk of doing nothing. The risk of keeping savings in accounts that earn less than inflation, watching purchasing power erode silently year after year, the risk of never developing financial knowledge, and therefore always depending on someone else to make the important decisions, the risk of short-term safety that guarantees long-term mediocrity. Buffett has made the distinction between risk and uncertainty many times over the course of his career. True risk, in his view, is permanent loss of capital, not temporary decline. Not the normal volatility of a market moving up and down. Permanent loss. And permanent loss is most often caused not by bold, informed decisions, but by uninformed decisions made in moments of excitement or panic. Understanding this reframes what it means to be financially cautious. Real caution is not avoiding all risk. Real caution is deeply understanding what you are doing before you do it, and then being patient enough to let it work. The fifth lesson is perhaps the most human of all, and the one most rarely discussed in conversations about money. It is about reputation, integrity, and the long game of trust. Buffett has said in various forms across many decades that it takes a lifetime to build a reputation and moments to destroy one. This is not a statement about optics. It is a statement about the actual mechanics of sustained success. The most durable businesses, the most durable financial relationships, the most durable wealth are all built on trust, on doing what you said you would do, on treating people honestly even when dishonesty would be easier or more profitable in the short term, on building something real rather than projecting something impressive. This is a principle that extends far beyond investing. It extends to how you conduct yourself in business, in relationships, in every interaction that has financial implications. The person who builds a reputation for integrity over decades opens doors that remain permanently closed to those who optimize for short-term advantage. Wealth built on trust compounds differently than wealth built on cleverness. It is more stable, it is more resilient, and when things get difficult, as they always eventually do, the person with deep relational trust has resources that no balance sheet can capture. Now imagine someone who takes all of this seriously, not just intellectually, but behaviorally, someone who decides at whatever age they are reading this to begin operating by these principles consistently. They start by stopping the bleeding of lifestyle inflation, not dramatically, not all at once, but intentionally. They begin to look at every spending decision and ask whether it is moving them toward financial freedom or simply maintaining the appearance of success. They begin to invest in what they understand. They develop genuine knowledge in one or two areas rather than spreading themselves thin across dozens of trends they do not actually comprehend. They become patient with quality. They stop selling when markets decline because they have taken the time to understand why they own what they own. They make peace with the slowness of the first few years. They understand that the first decade of building wealth often feels like nothing is happening because the numbers are still small. But they also understand what is actually happening. The foundation is being laid. The habits are being formed. The knowledge is being accumulated. And the compounding is beginning, quietly and visibly in the background. By year 5, something starts to shift. The number is bigger than it was, but more importantly, the behavior has become automatic. The emotional reactions to market movements have softened. The impulse to chase what is exciting has been replaced by the satisfaction of watching something consistent grow. The distance between who they were financially 5 years ago and who they are now is measurable, real, and entirely the result of sustained intentional choices. By year 10, the change is profound, not just in the numbers, though the numbers by now are telling a very different story than they were a decade ago. The change is in identity, in how this person relates to money, to time, to decisions. They have become someone who is genuinely in control of their financial life, not because circumstances became easy, but because they developed the discipline to respond to circumstances rationally when everyone around them was responding emotionally. This is what financial compounding actually looks like from the inside. It is not a dramatic moment. It is a gradual, almost quiet transformation of who you are and how you think. The question that remains at the end of all of this is not whether these principles work. They do. The evidence is as long as human history. The question is what you will do with them. Because here is the reality that no one likes to say plainly. Most people who watch videos like this, who read books about wealth, who attend seminars and listen to podcasts about financial freedom, will not change. Not because they cannot, but because they will return to the familiar discomfort of their current habits and wait for a better time to begin, a better month, a better year, a better version of themselves that somehow arrives without effort. That better time does not come on its own, and the version of yourself who is financially free does not appear. It is built slowly, deliberately, through decisions that are invisible to everyone around you, made in the quiet moments when no one is watching and the easier path is obvious. Buffett did not become who he is by having access to information no one else had. The principles he used were known to anyone who cared to study them. What separated him was not knowledge alone. It was the willingness to act on that knowledge consistently, patiently, and rationally for decade after decade. You now know what you know. The principles have been laid out plainly. The traps have been named. The path forward is as clear as it has ever been. What happens next is entirely up to you. If something in this shifted your perspective, if you found yourself seeing money, time, or your own financial behavior differently than you did when you first pressed play, then this video did what it was meant to do. Subscribe, not because we asked, but because there is more work to do, more lenses to build, more patterns to study, and the person who shows up to do that work consistently over time is the person who ultimately earns the life that most people only talk about wanting. The journey is long. Begin it anyway.